This is John Long, the President and CEO of McCall's Chapel School. Wanted to spend a few minutes with you today going over the understanding and reporting of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Before I get into the actual training, I wanted to start and to end this presentation, this training, with our mission here at McCall's. Why are we here? What is it we do? Our mission is to provide life-changing supports to individuals with intellectual disabilities so that they may live independent, well-adjusted, and happy lives in the manner of their own informed choosing. That's why we're here every day. That's what we do 24/7, 365 at McCall's Chapel School. Now, it's important, I think, to define. Let's take the guesswork out of abuse. Let's take the guesswork out of neglect and exploitation. Let's go ahead and define each of those words. Abuse refers to the ill treatment, violation, revilement, malignment, exploitation, and/or otherwise disregard of an individual. When I say individual, think of one of our residents. And this abuse occurs whether or not it's purposeful, whether or not it was due to carelessness, inattentiveness, or omission by the perpetrator, by the employee. And before I go on this slide, I want to note the source at the bottom, McCall's Human Resources Policy and Procedures Handbook. You should have a copy of the handbook. You should have access to a copy of the handbook. And if you don't, ask you to get with Sharon Stone, Director of Human Resources, and make sure that you do have access, either the availability or the direct control of the McCall's Human Resources Policy and Procedures Handbook. Now, regarding abuse, what types of abuse are there? There's certainly physical abuse. This is any physical motion. It's the examples there: hitting, slapping, punching, kicking, pinching, whatever it might be. Any physical motion by which bodily harm or trauma occurs. Verbal abuse, any use of oral, written, or gestured language by which abuse occurs. This includes making disparaging, making derogatory remarks, comments, terms aimed at our residents here at McCall's. There's psychological abuse. This includes, but is not limited to, the humiliation, the harassment, and threats of punishment or deprivation, sexual coercion, intimidation, whereby an individual, think of one of our residents, suffer psychological harm or trauma. Neglect means a willful act of omission, means you purposely didn't do something. I mean, a willful act of omission which directly results in a resident suffering or being exposed to a substantial risk of imminent suffering, physical injury, or emotional injury. Let me repeat that because I kind of stuttered through the definition. Neglect means a willful act of omission which directly results in a resident suffering or being exposed to a substantial risk of imminent suffering, physical injury, or emotional injury. Let's define exploitation. Exploitation occurs when a caretaker, an employee, A, uses an individual, a resident's, or a resident's resources for the profit or self-advantage of the employee or someone other than the resident themselves. And B, it may involve the use of undue influence, coercion, harassment, duress, deception, false representation, or false pretense. Types of exploitation, obviously, first that pops in my mind is financial exploitation. This involves stealing, involves borrowing, or involves using or otherwise purloining an individual's financial or material resources. Again, when I say individual, think of a resident. So financial exploitation involves stealing, borrowing, using, or otherwise purloining a resident's financial or material resources. Sexual exploitation includes, but is not limited to, an employee's causing, allowing, permitting, or encouraging a resident to engage in prostitution or in the lewd, obscene, or pornographic filming or depiction of the resident in those acts as defined by state law. Now, our responsibility is legal. It's legal at the state level. It's legal at the federal level. It's not something we made up at McCall's. Our responsibility, state law requires every person with reason to believe that an individual is or has been abused, neglected, or exploited to report the condition or incident to the administrator or designated person who will then report to the appropriate state offices. Just as importantly are allegations. And when I say just as importantly, I mean to reporting allegations. I've underlined it, the first bullet there. Allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation must be reported. You may see something, you may witness something, or you may hear that something occurred. Both have to be reported. Possibility certainly exists. The likelihood is certainly there that an allegation may later be unsubstantiated. We will investigate it. We will do it with the help of the state survey teams. We'll look into it, and we may come back and say, no, abuse did not take place. No, neglect or exploitation did not take place. But it's our responsibility to report it. When in doubt, if you're uncertain, if you're unsure of whether or not something that you hear as an allegation is an allegation, err on the side of contacting the administrator or the designated staff. Who are the administrators and designated staff? Maybe the most important slide in this presentation. As you witness incidents of abuse, neglect, exploitation, as you hear allegations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, who do you go to? Well, this is who you go to. In homes 2, 3, 4, 5, and 15, the administrator is Courtney Perry. The case manager is Peyton Taylor. Homes 7, 8, 9, 10, the administrator is Kathy Mathis. The case manager is Lila Patton. Homes 11, 12, 13, and 14, the administrator is Steve Phillips. The case manager is Rachel Royal. Will tell you in any instance of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, you can report to any of these individuals. In other words, if you witness something in home 14, it's going to be satisfactory for you to report it to Kathy Mathis. Steve Phillips may be the administrator over 14, but Kathy Mathis will also work. Courtney Perry would also work. Peyton or Lila would also work. By the same token, you can always come to the executive leadership of McCalls. You can come to me. You can come to Cindy Stone. Our phone numbers, office and cell, are listed there. And this applies not only to abuse, neglect, and exploitation, but any topic that you think you need to speak with someone in an executive leadership position. You can always come and visit to me or Cindy Stone. And as I said at the top of the training, I wanted to revisit with emphasis our mission statement. We've talked about abuse, neglect, exploitation. It's an extremely important topic for who we are and what we do. It can't be emphasized too much what we do when we either witness or hear an allegation of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We have actions that we must take. And that ties into who we are and what we do and why we're here. So I've added the mission statement on this last slide, again, for emphasis. We're here to provide life-changing supports to individuals with intellectual disabilities. Let's just say we're here to provide life-changing supports to our McCalls residents so that our McCalls residents may live independent, well-adjusted, and happy lives in the manner of their own informed choosing. No one should live at McCalls in fear. No one should work at McCalls in fear. We all, every employee of McCalls, has a legal, has a moral, has an ethical responsibility of what to do, who to go to, what to report in instances of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Thanks for watching this training. It'll be archived on our YouTube channel. You can always refer back to it if you need to know a definition, if you need to know a phone number, if you need to know a name of an administrator or a case manager. It'll be available on the McCalls Chapel School YouTube page. Thanks.